everyone, JC with FFL Consultants. Today, we have a very special guest, Jason+Knowles, who is a U.S. Export Regulations Compliance Services consultant. And the reason why we're bringing this feed to you is because we've recently been getting a lot of questions regarding ITAR. And obviously, we have got a lot of inquiries about becoming importers, exporters, manufacturers, and such, because the firearms industry is booming right now, and everybody's kind of interested in getting in the game. Interestingly enough, the Itar transition to EAR actually occurred back in March of 2020, which at the same time the pandemic started. So I think we've just come full circle now, and now everybody's realizing, oh, wait a second, do I need to register for this? What do I need to do? What does ITAR mean? What does the transition mean? And there's just not a lot of information out there because obviously the government kind of shut down, and the industry started booming with sales of firearms and so on and so forth. So Jason, welcome.
Thank you, JC. Super grateful to be able to be on here and talk about those things and help folks out.
Sure. So a little background on Jason. Jason's a former Department of State Defense Trade Control Analyst. He's also an Air Force retired combat veteran, and he currently, like I said, serves as a U.S. Export Controls and Compliance Consultant. So it's really instrumental and great to have him on board with us, helping our clients answer questions about everything import, export, ITAR compliance versus EAR, and all that transition that occurred. So, we're going to cover really high level stuff today, because if we got into the weeds, we'd be here all day. So one thing that I really want to touch on is just the awareness piece. You as importers, you as exporters, you as manufacturers, and even you as dealers need to be aware of as it relates to ITAR, EAR, and what's going on out there. So Jason, talk to us. Tell us what happened in March.
Well, in March, it was actually the final, if you will, initial changes to the International Traffic in Arms Regulation, the ITAR, in regards to a 2006 initiative to update the export regulations that hadn't been really updated for decades. And so because of 2006's initiative, these last couple sections of the ITAR, there was actually three, it's category 1, 2, and 3, which is the firearms that a lot of folks are dealing with, and the ammunition associated with that are in those categories. That was the last one to get updated from that 2006 initiative. And that again went into effect March 2020. And so that's really where we started. And it moved a lot of things that are commercially available firearms, commercially available sporting, hunting ammunition, sporting and hunting firearms and accessories. It moved all those things from defense articles, those military high kind of things, to the export administration regulation, the EAR, that the government still needs to account for, but they don't have just military purposes. Obviously, they're sporting and hunting, so they better live, if you will, in the EAR there with the Department of Commerce, and that's what happened in 2020. There in March 2020.
Yeah, and there really hasn't been a lot of guidance put out about all of these changes. It just basically took effect. We had the pandemic, and there's not a lot of information out there other than the regulations themselves and the changes to the USML and to the EAR, right?
Well, the information was as the stuff moved. The stuff that was previously export controlled under the ITAR moved to export control under the EAR, and those processes associated with the EAR, though new to the firearms and ammunition industry that produce that commercial and hunting and sporting products, they're not used to that. But that architecture has existed for a long time now. So that's, though it's new to the industry, not really new to the government as far as those processes go. And so it's getting used to that and getting into that for folks that are new to that.
Sure.
And so that's the core function there of what really happened with the activities. And that may explain some of that, why there's not a whole lot of new information about how the export processes and jurisdictions have changed.
So FFLs across the board, it doesn't matter if you're a type 1 all the way through type 7, etc. You really have to be aware and know what applies to you.
And I think that's a great segue into a subject that a lot of folks may not be really cognizant of or aware of, is that the laws that govern exporting from the United States are different from the laws for permanent import or the management of firearms and some ammunition within the United States. You know, I would think that most of the folks listening are very aware of the ATF, the Gun Control Act, the National Firearms Act, those laws that create that process inside the United States of having to keep track of all the firearms, logging them, and all those other things. But the Arms Export Control Act, which is a completely different law and managed by different folks than ATF, you know, State Department, the Commerce Department, even some of it by DOD, Department of Defense. They're very different processes, very different departments on how they deal with them because the laws are different and therefore the regulations are different. And so that's an interesting point to have to understand of like, well, I have to deal with it like this within the United States. True, but that's a different law and a different set of regulations supporting that law than related to export. So that's a very interesting and important nuance to understand in how to handle the different activities related to these items.
And it's really especially important based on what your business practices are, what you are doing as a federal firearms licensee, no matter what type of license you have or what type of SOT class you have, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Any FFL, regardless of SOT or not, if you're going to export firearms, you most likely need a license. It doesn't matter which jurisdiction you're in, but we'll talk to that a little bit here, I think, coming up. But if you're going to export, you probably need a license.
Right.
But the other thing nuances is that now with the searching and sourcing and export, you know, of overseas goods, parts for firearms or firearms and ammunition to bring into the United States, or even selling goods outside the United States, that's all going to be generated within that export compliance realm, most likely. Or even harder, you've got some sort of mix between a permanent import. Now I got to deal with ATF, but I've got to export some information to a foreign supplier or a foreign manufacturer that are going to then provide those parts for me to maybe possibly assemble in the United States. And now you're crossing jurisdictions potentially and having to get multiple approvals or authorizations across all the different FFL categories potentially,
Right.
depending on what you're doing.
Right. And not getting too into the weeds on the supply chain piece, because, you know, obviously we have that background as well as, you know, knowing who your supplier is and whether or not they're actually the one manufacturing it, and are they handing it off to another person to manufacture, and what does that look like, and all those different components of the manufacturing process and the supply chain, being aware of all of that, right?
The due diligence, absolutely. And that's actually the same going the other way. If you're going to be exporting outside the United States, there's a reflective due diligence of who am I selling to? Are they going to proliferate that item to folks who aren't supposed to get it? And so you've got that due diligence of understanding your foreign partners going both directions with the goods.
Right. So let's really get into kind of the high level on the vast majority of FFLs out there, right? They are just the local mom and pop, you know, storefront, home-based FFL that's either breaking into the industry or that's been established in the industry. Maybe they have one unit, maybe they have multi-units, multiple storefronts. What about them? How does this change affect them? If they're not exporting, if they're simply manufacturing a firearm for a civilian in the United States.
So really, we're going to break these folks up into two groups. Those folks who aren't manufacturing, but they're not exporting either. And those folks who aren't exporting, but they are manufacturing. The first set of folks that are just, you know, your pawnbrokers, your dealers, folks getting and marketing and selling goods within the United States. Now they don't have to DDTC register. They can save that registration fee every year because there's no element of the ITAR that they are responsible for maintaining in accordance with that arms export control authorization, that act, that law, the AECA. They just have to comply with the ATF regulations, which support the Gun Control Act and the National Firearms Act. Where we get to that second group, it gets a little bit more interesting. If you're not exporting and you're manufacturing in the United States, there's two directions you can go. If you're not doing automatic firearms, so you're not doing any NFA or Type 2 firearms, well, you just still don't need to register with the DDTC. Because again, if you're not making any automatic firearms or you're not dealing in silencer manufacturing, and that's a key here, silencer manufacturing within the United States, you don't need to register with DDTC because you're not making any quote unquote defense articles that are captured within the ITAR. Well, if you're not making any defense articles captured within the ITAR, you don't have to register with DDTC. That's only if you're making things that are defense articles. So that takes us to that last category. If you're manufacturing automatic weapons or you're putting together silencers in the United States, you're manufacturing, you're producing those things, you probably need to register with DDTC as a defense article manufacturer. So not only do you have that FFL that reflects that manufacturing, but now you have that SOT that reflects that NFA Title II firearm manufacturer that you probably also need to be DDTC registered. Right. And I say probably because there's a few nuances there, but most likely you will probably need to be registered with DDTC as well, irrelevant if you're exporting those items or not.
And those nuances are what we run into all the time because, you know, when we're out doing site visits and mock inspections for FFLs around the country, we run across folks that, you know, have their 07 and they have their class 2 SOT and they're manufacturing. And, you know, we look at all of the things they're doing, all of the processes they're going through, checking their books, checking their paperwork, making sure everything is up to snuff, making sure everything is correct. And then we find out, hey, I need to renew my ITAR, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Why are you renewing your ITAR? You're not doing any of the things that you're required to register with ITAR for. And they're like, well, I'd just rather be safe than sorry. And, or even those situations, well, you know, we've been thinking about doing X, Y, and Z, and we'd rather, you know, play it on the safe side and be ready if we want to pull that trigger or not. So that's really a lot of what we run into when we're out there talking to these FFLs. And you know, I'd rather play it on the safe side. It's $2,250 a year to play it on the safe side. And yeah, it's not a huge amount of money, but obviously you can utilize that money for other things, you know, and we want to make sure that you're not just spending money to spend money for no reason, right? Firearms manufacturer. And it's really, really important that you pay attention and you know all of these different things that are occurring in this environment, in this regulatory kind of warehouse of information, and getting to understand the ITAR and EAR and what you have to do as far as the Department of Commerce. What do you have to do with BIS as a small firearms retailer or a small firearms manufacturer in the United States, Jason?
So if you're manufacturing with the United States, again, that jurisdictional change between the NFA Title II automatics and that the suppressors, the suppressor work, that's separate from the semi-automatic, non-automatic, non-NFA type products. If you're doing the second, those non-NFA type products, you don't have to register with DDTC. And actually, other than as far as the EAR and the State Department, you don't have to do anything unless you're exporting. And again, if you're exporting, there's just a process to go through in regards to accessing the State Department's portal that supports the applications for export, and going through that process. There are nuances. You can do it yourself. It is something that everyone can learn. It's just, it takes time like anything else. But there are no fees associated with the Department of Commerce getting access to that portal or even submitting applications for export authorization. If someone wants to go down that road of exporting from the United States. But again, if you're staying within the United States and you're not doing automatic firearms, and you're not doing the manufacturing of suppressors, there's no registration with Department of Commerce or the Department of State for that activity anymore.
Right. And what about those scenarios where, you know, I might be manufacturing parts or components for a suppressor, but I have no intention of exporting it or anything else? What does that look like?
If you have a process where you gain parts for suppressors, and those parts were always intended to be designed and used as suppressors, which is an important nuance, then, and you are putting them together and you are selling them within the United States, you are creating a defense article, and that would drive a DDTC registration requirement, irrelevant if you're going to export that item or not, because you are making defense articles within the United States. And that's stated within the ITAR as a requirement.
And that's really a great segue. You know, I always look at these things, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? So, and we always have to talk about the ugly part. And the ugly part is, what if you're in violation? What's going to happen to me if I don't register for ITAR? If, you know, is the Department of State going to show up? Is the ATF going to say something? What's going to happen to me if I'm not in compliance? So go through some of that. What happens in those scenarios?
If you're not registered and that gets identified, what has I understand to be happening in the past is that DDTC will using their administrative compliance processes, there are some punitive actions that they can take. They have gone back, and in that researching of that incident, they've directed people to pay back fees, as well as punitive fines, depending on the scenario. But one of the other things is that DDTC is interested in national security elements of the application of the ITAR. So if there's something that's been going on, you have the opportunity to voluntarily disclose that you have done things incorrectly. You have violated the regulation and the prescribed actions and requirements within the ITAR. You can voluntarily tell the government that. That's actually very much encouraged by the government, both by the State Department under the ITAR and by the Department of Commerce under the AER, and they look on that very favorably. We've messed up. Here's what happened. Here's how it happened. Here's how we identified that we were incorrect. And here's what we're doing to correct that action. And this voluntary disclosure is part of that. Those agencies look very favorable on that action. And so there's quite a few times where they will tell you, make sure you follow the rules and move along. Mm-hmm. Especially if you voluntarily tell them, it's like, we made a mistake. It happened. Here's what happened while that happened. Here's how our actions impacted or didn't impact, a lot of times, national security. If someone's manufacturing automatics or suppressors in the United States, we weren't unaware when we started doing that we had a requirement to register with DDTC. Here's our voluntary disclosure. Please note that we've also applied for the DDTC registration. And it's possible that they may not do anything except send you a letter and go, thank you for voluntarily disclosing that information. Now that you know, please continue to monitor and comply with the ITAR requirements.
Right. And it's really important to note that. I mean, we do it all the time with FFLs across the country. Anytime that we find an issue, and we evaluate the issue and determine and work with the ATF and work with other government agencies to determine, you know, okay, what's the severity of this violation? What's the severity of the rules that you broke, the laws you broke? And we'll go from there. We'll figure it out. Whether it's talk to counsel, it's a little bit more serious, or whether it's, hey, look, at local ATF field office, this is what's going on. What do you want us to do about this? But 99.9% of the time, we work very diligently to get you out of that mess and get that problem corrected. And then we make the determination, okay, next step is we need to self-disclose, self-report. We call it a declaration of violations. And that way, you know, when it really comes down to it, I think the government is fair for the most part and actually looks at that in a very approving manner and says, okay, you're doing the right thing. We understand things get screwed up, etc. So I think it's really important to reiterate that and highlight that is that, okay, if you made a mistake, reach out, we can help you, and we'll get you through the process. And that's what we do as consultant teams. So it's really great to have you here, Jason. So here's something that's going to happen. As you all know, we have at least once a month an Ask Us Anything event. So coming up real soon, we're going to have an Ask Us Anything event where Jason's going to be our guest speaker. And you're going to bring your questions about ITAR and EAR and all the things that you're doing as an FFL, no matter what FFL type you are. And Jason's going to be there to answer your questions and give you insights, give you a little bit more detail maybe on different things impacting the industry. Who knows, maybe there's some new stuff coming down the pipe that you're not aware of that Jason can shed some light on as well. So stay tuned for that. JB is going to get that information out to you in a newsletter coming up. So Jason, again, thanks so much for joining us today. It's great working with you, partnering with you, and going through all of the myriad of things that are DDTC and EAR and ITAR and all of that.
JC, thank you so much for the opportunity, and looking forward to more.
All right. All right, everyone, stay tuned for more information on that Ask Us Anything event. And we'll see you again soon. This is JC with FFL Consultants. Have a great day.